Hello, this is Michael Wojcik with a Rochester City Council update for March 21st, 2016. Number of items today. Not surprisingly, after that debacle of a meeting we had last time, um, things tend to go a little bit smoother when you clear the air a little bit. I put out a long list of frustrations that I had with the way that entire 501 First development had been handled, in particular the behavior of Adam Kramer and kind of misrepresenting some things. And not surprisingly, a lot of downtown developers, people that are doing it right, a lot of city staff, when they saw that list of 19 items they put up there, they actually were pretty appreciative of the fact that somebody's getting this stuff out of the air. I'm confident that we're going to be able to address some of these persistent cronyism, special favors issues that we face in the city of Rochester, not because I'm making a big stink about it, but because I'm able to make a big stink about it because I'm getting fed a lot of information by other property owners, other developers who are just as sick as the system as I am. It's really no excuse for that, and I think we saw the perfect resolution today. They really, the 501 First group really tried to badly cheapen up their project, put some super cheap materials in, and the city council said no. It was a 4-3 vote. It should have been a 7-0 vote to say no, but we said no. Funny thing happens. Bilderback, it's his ward, goes in and sits down with him for a couple hours, a couple days after that, and wouldn't you know, the reasonable neighborhoods and the city council right away come up with an easy agreement that everyone can live with. It shouldn't have to be like this. It shouldn't take the city council going through this massive process to tell a developer no, to make them come to a reasonable agreement. What we asked for was not particularly great. It was not a great burden, but ultimately the neighborhood got some materials that were decent and actually representative of the deal that the community made with the developers. And that's particularly important when you're throwing this massive amount of money into a project without getting very much in return. On the notion of TIF, we actually initiated two TIF districts for projects today, both of which I support and both of which passed unanimously. For the downtown project that Joe Weiss is doing, staff had recommended $400,000. The council ended up going with about $440,000. A small difference. It's just what's available. And the big thing with this one is it was originally supposed to be a 9% tax credit project. It moved down to a 4% tax credit project, which means they got a lot less money coming in, and they had to really up their materials to fit into that neighborhood. They face unique challenges that they wouldn't face in a lot of other affordable housing projects that they did. So again, unanimously, we did go ahead and do the basically the largest amount that we could, and I think that's a good deal. It works out to be not a terrible amount for per unit, and we're getting almost 70 units of quality affordable housing walkable to downtown. That's good. I mean, we need several thousand, and we can't, there's no way we can just give incentives to do enough affordable housing. We'll never get there. The other part is there was a similar project. It was a senior housing project, a little bit bigger up on Valley High. And that one, again, staff recommended a number that was lower than what they were looking for. And the big issue with that one, and I talked to the developer afterwards, is that they were asking for more money. And the reality is this was a 4% project by design. It was greenfield. They didn't have the astronomical costs of developing downtown. And the big thing is we're going to need a lot more 4% tax credit projects to be done in Rochester to build this kind of housing. So we kind of did two things. One, we asked them to figure out how to make this work, but also let's bring in the HRA and the HRA levy and figure out how they can be involved in the gap financing as well. The HRA should really be taking over a lot of these housing decisions and recommendations for the city of Rochester now that they have the staff and the budget. And frankly, when it comes to housing, their staff is way more experienced and good at these things than we are. But in this particular case, we did go with the staff recommendation, which was about $400,000 less than what the developer was looking for. But I did kind of joke with the developer that between the two projects, it was the same developer on both of them, that they got it about an extra $40,000, so at least paid for his trip down from the cities. And I think it's going into building a really quality project. Again, I'm very, there are some things I don't like using TIF for. 501 First would be a perfect example of that. The Holiday Inn would be another example of that. But affordable housing is one of the greatest public goods that we are in demand for right now. And as such, I'm fairly supportive of that. we had a whole bunch of developments that went through. I think they all passed 7-0 tonight. You know, it doesn't have to be this difficult, but we have a few people in the community, and it seems to be some of the same names that keep getting attached to these ones, where they just aren't they aren't treating the public very fairly. They're not treating neighborhoods with respect, and I'm glad that we continue to pass 90% of our development projects without much controversy, because it really shows when this controversy does show up, it's not necessarily the council or the city that's broken. It's actually we've got some broken developers and it just isn't working. And a lot of these developers, I know they can do better, but they're trying to play games because they've been successful for years in playing games, and they've seen it happen time and time again. Couple other things. There was another development project, a suburban one of the few suburban ones that I actually thought was a good development out in southwest Rochester. And I think it's good because they're going out of their way to do a true conservation development. They're really preserving some delicate areas by doing a really fantastic development. Obviously, it's all luxury housing. I think the biggest concern from the neighbors was in terms of the two streets that are not adequate today. And I made sure of two things ultimately. One, that the roads would be adequate within the specified period of time, so that the development can go on. But also, too, we were doing so without taxpayer expense, which was one of my concerns going in. The project will basically be funded by on 28th Street will be funded by developer contributions and some assessments. And that's the way to do a project like that. You know, the only people that are benefiting from that project are the people that live right in there. So they should be the ones that are footing the bills for it. And I think that's the system working like it should. Again, a little bit of discussion back and forth with the neighbors. The neighborhood asked to not have access to one of the basically access to 15th from the back of their lots, which, you know, it's not necessarily a big deal, but again, I listened to the neighbors. I thought that was reasonable enough for them. You could certainly put driveways on the front, and I just wish that I would wish the projects in the core neighborhoods got the same kind of respect for those kind of details that these projects out in the suburbs get, because that hasn't been happening for a very long time. Very happy to go along with that request. It was reasonable. It's not going to hurt the development, just like most of those requests that come from core neighborhoods downtown. Food trucks was the topic at the committee of the whole meeting today. Again, it was a committee of the whole meeting, so in theory, we don't take public testimony. We did have one person who tried to, enter into discussion. And I told her personally, this is a committee of the whole meeting. We don't take testimony here, and so as a result, it's unfortunate. I hated sitting there and trying to write an ordinance and draft up an ordinance before taking input from the people who actually are the entrepreneurs behind the food trucks. But I did the next best thing, of course. Sitting there, I had a number of people in the room and elsewhere that were answering my questions, sending me information so that I was better informed. I was able to pull out a lot of information the staff had no idea about, the rest of the council had no idea about, and I think it saved us a lot of pain and suffering with that. I just want to make sure that these businesses are in fact viable in Rochester. We cut down, the fee is going to be similar to what it is for Minneapolis, and that's fair. That should be a good way of doing it. The frustration comes in after this. We had two other topics in there. One was the neighborhood meeting engagement, and the other one was some development fees. And again, committee meeting, we're not supposed to be taking public testimony. Both situations right away, we just defer over to the developers, because apparently if you have a paid lobbyist in Rochester, you can just speak out at whatever meeting you want, or we'll invite you for comment. But my God, if you're a neighborhood person or somebody there, a food truck entrepreneur, we just can't have that stuff. And it's incredibly minor. I mean, I imagine if somebody was burning off stuff, we probably would have heard them out, but it goes back to the point that if you're well connected in this community, you get preferential treatment. And it's not fair to a lot of other people. And again, I say the reason that I'm confident that we're going to put an end to some of these practices and basically make those folks that can afford the paid lobbyists, give them the same treatment as everyone else, because it's not just me saying this. throwing out the word cronyism. Where did I get that? I got that from 3 different downtown property owners who were furious with the city of Rochester for giving preferential treatment on some skyway work. So, it is cronyism, whether it's major, like some of the stuff that's gone on with downtown development agreements, or minor, some of the things, like we were talking about at the committee of the whole today. They're both issues, and it needs to stop. And again, I completely understand that these special interests can't stand me, and they're going to do everything they can yet again to try and get rid of me. And even the city administrator today was pretty upset with my position, and not backing down on my issues with 501 First. And I told him again and again, I do not work for you. I do not work for special interests. I work for the people of Rochester. That message has served me well for 8 years, and I'm going to keep doing that. The fact that after the last video, I had a number of campaign contributions come in, frankly, a lot of them came in from developers, tells me that it's the right message, and it's not just neighborhoods and people like me that are so furious with what's been going on for such a long time here, but rather it's a lot of really good developers too who care about this community, that hate seeing products get cheapened. They hate seeing neighborhoods come to an agreement and get stabbed in the back. It's just not right. It doesn't need to happen. And again, you force the developers to act professional and come back with reasonable solutions. And just like that, you took a very contentious issue with 501 First, and boom, almost no discussion, passes 7-0. This isn't rocket science. Other cities do it. We need to quit blaming neighborhoods. We need to quit blaming the process when we have developers that just aren't living up to their end of the bargain. The last topic I'm going to tell you about is the neighborhood discussion in terms of neighborhood notification. This is actually something we did a long time ago, and the goal is to try and make more meaningful interaction between neighbors and developers when they're asking for special permissions, things like restricted development or incentive development. We've been doing that for really quite some period of time, but those meetings haven't always been meaningful, and this is an attempt to try and get them at a point where they can actually have meaningful input. And let me give you one example that you might not have known about. One of the biggest issues of contention was a requirement in the 2nd Street corridor plan that the facades on First Street of whatever was built in that corridor must be residential in nature and facing the neighborhood. And that was a requirement for the Holiday Inn project that some people in the media have an unhealthy obsession with. And this was an issue throughout the process. And eventually, towards the end, when they actually had neighborhood support, the developer just relented and did what was required in the plan. But the bottom line is by the time they had those meaningful discussions about putting a residential facade on the back of a building facing the neighborhood, the battles had begun. There was so much ill will that was created. It shouldn't have had to have been that way. And again, this is one of the things the neighborhood got a bad rap for basically asking for what was required in the plan. That's really unfortunate. So my goal is to have these meetings earlier with neighborhoods when they can have meaningful input. But I think the second part of that is when the neighborhood raises issues where things don't comply with the agreements they have with the plans we've adopted, and they should, staff needs to get on that and come up with some direction on that fairly quickly to avoid some of the issues. Now, there were a whole host of issues with Holiday Inn, but I think it's important to remember that the Holiday Inn project was sitting there with a letter of support and probably would have passed the city council unanimously in its final form. However, then they wanted a whole bunch of taxpayer money, and I don't know how much, but it's a lot more than the media seems to be reporting on. So they didn't have support for that, and DMC, to their credit, wasn't willing to jump through hoops and try and modify our plans and our goals on the fly. And that's been something the city's been doing for far too long. So I am heartened. We've had some great discussions on how we do some visioning and come up with a plan for that area. It's very important that we come up with a plan and stick to it, as opposed to having a concept and modify it every time a project comes through. And that was really one of the things that ran in the way of the Holiday Inn project. So once again, thank you everybody for support. Those of you watching this, I really appreciate the campaign contributions that have come in. I am up again. I get I always have a well-funded opponent who's supported by all the people who don't stand for what I stand for. So thank you for your continuing support, and I'll keep working for you. And hey, 16 public hearings, and I was home by 10 o'clock. You can't beat that. So really appreciate it. Good night.